This is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Luigi Barkil. Our top stories. Heightened tensions across Ukraine as it gets set to mark Independence Day amid warnings of fresh Russian missile strikes.
Our other headlines: fears of a Eurozone recession increase after business growth in France and Germany shrink. Europe's biggest economies are experiencing record inflation.
Lights out in Shanghai, one of the world's most famous skylines, goes dark to save energy.
And where has all the water gone? We're live at Lake Garda in Italy, where levels have fallen to 15-year lows.
Ukraine's president says there will be a powerful response if Russia carries out attacks to coincide with Independence Day. Wednesday also marks 6 months since Moscow's invasion of Ukraine.
Security has been stepped up in the capital, Kyiv, where public events are banned until Thursday. The United States says Russia plans to launch fresh attacks against civilian infrastructure and government buildings. Volodymyr Zelensky has vowed to raise the national flag in all parts of the country, including Russian-occupied territory.
We will never recognize someone's colors on our land and in our sky. We are always ready to defend our blue and yellow flag.
Well, let's talk to the Associated Press correspondent, Kieran McQuillan, in the city of Lviv. Kieran, so heightened tension amid these new security warnings. What's it like there?
That's indeed. There is a definite fear that there could be widespread Russian attacks as they use not only these 2 anniversaries, but the death of Daria Dugina in Moscow as well. If you just look behind me here in Rynok Square in the center of Lviv, there's a display of Russian tanks and other military hardware, which is on display as part of these National Day celebrations. And there are people here to look at these tanks, but most other big events around this event have actually been cancelled in the capital, Kyiv. Maybe some of those people leaving Kyiv coming to Lviv. We're hearing that from a lawmaker in Kyiv that her apartment block, that half the cars there in the car park have left. There is a sense that that city has been deserted, and some of those people may be coming across here to the west where it is relatively peaceful. Now, the US Embassy this morning put out a statement. They said that they had credible information, that Russia is stepping up its efforts to launch strikes against Ukraine's civilian infrastructure and some government buildings. And indeed, all government workers in Kyiv have been told to work from home this week. We also know that starting exactly this hour in the second largest city here, Kharkiv, a 36-hour curfew and lockdown there. That city has come under renewed pressure. It's only 60 kilometers from the Russian border, And we do also understand yesterday from the Ukrainian military that in the Black Sea, at least 6 more cruise missile-bearing warships or submarines are supposed to be active in that area. So there's definitely fear that something big could happen tomorrow here.
Kieran, beyond the military campaigns, the talks, the diplomacy goes on. President Zelensky has attended a summit on Crimea. What more can you tell us? What more do we know?
Well, a year ago today, this Crimea platform was launched. Now, the idea behind this was to seek further ways to implement a set of measures to deoccupy the Crimea Peninsula and to protect the rights of Crimeans. Now, at that first event that happened a year ago today, 15 heads of state attended virtually. Today, that number was 40, one of them in person, Andrzej Duda, the Polish president, along with UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson, Emmanuel Macron from France. We also heard from Ursula von der Leyen, EU Commission President, as well as even the Japanese Prime Minister himself, Fumio Kishida. all pledging to find ways and seek ways to deoccupy Crimea and to return it to Ukrainian control. Now, all of this comes against a backdrop of renewed violence in Crimea. Since 2014, in that annexation, it was relatively untouched, especially by the events of the conflict that started 6 months ago here. But since August the 9th, we've seen an attack on a military complex there, which has taken out at least half of the air capability of the Black Sea Fleet. We've also seen drone attacks purported to be on the Sevastopol-based Black Sea Fleet headquarters. So we are seeing a renewed uptick of violence in the Crimea Peninsula. As Volodymyr Zelensky himself said at that conference, he said it all started in Crimea, and it is his hope that it will end in Crimea.
Kieran, thank you. Kieran McQuillan from the Associated Press in Lviv.
Well, from western Ukraine to the south of the country, people in the port city of Odessa are also preparing to mark Independence Day. Our correspondent Stephanie Freed is there. Stephanie, what's the mood like where you are?
It is terse, Naweed. The same fear of Russian missile strikes is here in Odessa. This is a major economic center, a major port hub, port city. And so there are tremendous concerns, and there are also tremendous warnings that are coming from the authorities here, telling people to stick close to bomb shelters, telling people to pay attention to the air raid sirens, because often people now just go about their business when the air raid sirens go off. But now, around these very, very serious concerns, events have been canceled, performances have been canceled. And up to about a week ago, we understood there would be public performances throughout the city. Within the past day, we got word that they've been canceled, but as the deputy mayor told us, temporarily. He said Independence Day performances, celebrations will happen, but apparently they're not going to happen on Wednesday, the 24th. Let's take a look at this story.
The Odessa Municipality Orchestra is rehearsing for Independence Day. Their piece is about longing and irrepressible hopes and dreams. Odessa's 40-member youth dance troupe is also practicing. They've been at it for 2 months.
Everything will be okay and we will win. This work is dedicated to our victory and independence.
Outdoor-only performances are scheduled for August 24th throughout Odessa's 4 city districts. Indoor and mass gatherings are banned because of the ongoing conflict. Performance locations won't be announced ahead of time for security reasons. Kyiv government officials may scrap entertainment altogether if warnings of planned Russian military strikes on Ukraine population centers come to fruition. The 24th is a crossover date marking significant and connected events, but the focus will be on independence.
Mornings will take place another day, not on this day. It is a holiday, and we are trying to create a holiday environment.
There will be no commemorations or memorials.
Officials may want to focus on the Independence Day aspect of August 24th. But the harsh reality is, half a year has gone by since the conflict started in Ukraine.
International NGOs estimate tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers and civilians have been killed since February 24th. Artists and officials fully cognizant of Ukraine's collective loss are choosing to focus on the future and life. Stephanie Freed, CGTN, Odessa, Ukraine.
The United Nations has expressed concern about Russia's plan to hold a so-called international tribunal for Ukrainian soldiers captured in Mariopol. The UN Human Rights Office says Russian-backed authorities appear to be installing metal cages in a hall in the city. Our correspondent Stuart Smith is in Moscow. Stuart, what more do we know about these tribunals?
Well, the United Nations has expressed its concern specifically with the way that these tribunals are likely to be held, and also the risk that there will not be a fair trial. Specifically, it said that it was concerned that these members of the Ukrainian armed forces would be seemingly held in these large metal cages and potentially tried together inside what is, or what used to be, Mariupol's Philharmonic Hall, right in the centre of Mariupol, not far where many of them defended the Azovstal steel plant a few months ago. The Speaker of the State Duma, the lower house of parliament here in Russia, says that these are people he believes who are war criminals that have killed, raped, destroyed and kept the civilian population of Donbass in fear, his words. And he says, therefore, he considers them Nazis, and they will receive punishment as required. There is some concern that that punishment for some of these captured troops could potentially be the death penalty, something that the so-called Donetsk People's Republic allows for in its constitution, particularly those foreign fighters which Russia and the troops of these separatist regions consider not prisoners of war, but some kind of mercenaries, fighters that have no protection under the Geneva Convention. The UN says that it does have observers in Ukraine, but is unlikely to be able to observe the tribunal. Russia says that international partners will be invited to observe, but we don't know yet who they will be.
The Russian Defense Ministry has given a briefing, an update on the latest fighting. What did they say?
Yeah, that's right. So the focus of the Ministry of Defense with its daily updates has almost always been exclusively on gains by Russia's armed forces and the allies in the so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republic. It said that the percentage of territory under the control of either of these forces is in Luhansk still remaining at 100%, in the Donetsk region around 55%, but there are still challenges there. For example, Russia said it had to shoot down a Ukrainian fighter jet which was flying over the Kharkiv region in the last 24 hours, and then also there are still threats on that peninsula, Crimea, held by Russian forces since 2014 after it was annexed, and UAVs, drones sent by Ukrainian armed forces still causing problems for people and the military defences, military bases like those in Sevastopol, a naval base, still causing problems there. An interesting update in the last few hours was that the Speaker of the lower house of parliament, who I just quoted talking about the prisoners of war, he says that he narrowly avoided a attempt at the, not an assassination attempt as such, but the building where he was meeting with Donetsk People's Republic administrators was hit minutes after he left the building by Ukrainian forces. So a narrow escape for him as he was meeting with officials there.
Stuart, thanks for that. Our correspondent Stuart Smith in Moscow.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the UK's busiest container port on strike for a third day. What will it take to get staff back to work?
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Soaring energy prices, surging inflation, strained supply chains. As costs spiral and goods run short, people are feeling the heat. Join us for a special new series, Crunch Time, starting August the 1st, here on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Fears of a Eurozone recession are increasing after business growth in both France and Germany shrank this month. Europe's biggest economies are experiencing record inflation along with uncertainty over the invasion of Ukraine. Our correspondent Trent Murray is in Berlin for us. Trent, France has joined Germany now with a shrinking economy. It's taken some by surprise, this news. Talk us through the figures.
You know, there's quite a bit to unpack here. This is all based on what's called the S&P Global Flash Composite Purchasing Managers Index. It's a very long way of saying effectively a survey of major companies in major European countries to kind of get a gauge of where things are at economically. And it's widely seen as quite an accurate and timely indicator of business conditions. Now let's start in Germany, where I am. For the second month in a row, the rating fell below the 50 mark. Now that mark is crucial because it is the threshold that separates expansion from contraction. So in other words, we've now had 2 months of contraction here in Germany based on this survey. Clearly, economic conditions, we know in Europe's biggest economy, have been worsening, as we've been talking about on this very program really for months. But it was over in France where there was more of a surprise, because the latest figures there also show a contraction. France falling below that threshold with a score of 49.8. Now that was a surprise because many economists were expecting that there would be an expansion there. So clearly that kind of issue around economic growth and those questions around how Europe will weather the winter in particular is starting to spread. S&P Global, for what it's worth, is saying, quote, high inflation and a waning post-COVID boost to demand has led businesses and consumers to cut back on discretionary spending. They go on to say European economies look set for a challenging run into the year end.
And to pick up on that, Trent, these are massive economies as far as the Eurozone is concerned. Is the rest of the region worried about recession now?
Well, look, it certainly feels like day by day we are seeing more and more indicators, more and more warnings that the Eurozone could fall into a recession. Now, for what it's worth, this survey showed the 19-member Eurozone falling down to 49.2, again, a small contraction. But it comes off the back of lots of other news that we are seeing. The Bundesbank here in Germany in the past 24 hours, they have said that a recession here in Germany is now likely. Also, a survey by Bloomberg released today shows a recession in the Eurozone is more likely than not. For what it's worth, the Euro hit below parity again against the US dollar on the back of this news. I just checked. It is once again at parity, but it really is hovering there. US dollar quite strong. So I think there is just news really kind of growing, almost a snowball, if you will, of kind of bad economic data, which shows the Eurozone could be in for a pretty difficult winter, particularly with those energy prices, which is what is really driving inflation, and they show no sign of coming down anytime soon.
Thanks for that, Trent. That's our correspondent, Trent Murray, in Berlin.
Well, amid those fears of a Eurozone recession, its currency, the euro, as Trent was explaining, is now hovering around parity with the US dollar, hitting a 20-year low. Let's talk to our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York. John, what are they saying about this there?
Well, the thing is, you have to compare the two central banks, I think, really, because the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank are really quite different. The Federal Reserve can be swift, it can be stealthy, and it can be steep in its raising of interest rates. And we've seen that just this year. In March, we had a 25 basis point hike, 50 in May, 75 in June, 75 in July. We're going to get 75, we think, in September, and we don't know yet about November. Now, compare that to the European Central Bank under Christine Lagarde. Now, ironically, the ECB, at least on paper, is more flexible than the central bank here, the Federal Reserve. But the thing is, you know, they do have a lot of guidance that they work to, which is one way and another fairly imprecise. They tend to look at the medium term, which is often a little bit vague or seen as that way. And you can certainly argue that the central bank here was late to the party when it came to raising interest rates. And then outside institutions within the Eurozone are often able to overtake the thinking of the central bank. And then you have differences within the governing council itself on long national lines. And the council, of course, meets every 2 weeks and then decides every 6 weeks. And they've only raised interest rates in the zone just the once in the last 11 years, and that was back in July. So therefore, money is flowing into the dollar and hurting or about to hurt economies all over the world, including those, as I think we were hearing from Trent just now, in the Eurozone. Now, the central bank doesn't really care, to be perfectly honest with you here. I mean, they do care, but they have a very domestic brief. Their brief is to look after the money supply and full employment. That's the key thing. And that's all they care about. And that's why I think the Jackson Hole Symposium, which they organize every year and which is coming up on Thursday and will last until Saturday, at which there'll be a major speech by Jerome Powell, the boss, is so important because so many people from around the world attend that for what amounts to their August holiday, really. And there's so much work is done behind the scenes. I mean, really, a lot of work is done behind the scenes, so much so that it's difficult to report on it, really. Guys?
So does that mean the stock summer of love is now over?
Well, put it this way. I'm going to put my caftan on after the show, stick a flower behind my ear and head to San Francisco. Well, I'm afraid we don't know, but it does rather look that way, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, Wall Street is torn. It's very torn. It's down sharply these last 2 days because it worries about the effect of sharply rising interest rates on corporate profits. But at the same time, it's also worried that the Federal Reserve may have softened its tone a little bit and may be about to reduce the pace of the rising of interest rates here. That's why Friday's speech by Jerome Powell is going to be so important. And I'm told now that he is likely to make an announcement that there will be a 75 basis point hike in September. Now, that's again extraordinary. He did it in July, and central bankers never, ever do this. They just don't signal this stuff. But he did in July. He's going to do it again, I think, on Friday when he speaks Friday morning in Jackson Hole in Wyoming, signal probably another 75 basis points. There's all that work going on behind the scenes. But you see, that Wall Street is down today because Wall Street looks at it like this. On the one hand, they don't want corporate profits to be hurt. But on the other hand, they do want inflation to be licked. And they're worried right now. The reason it's down today, they're worried that the Federal Reserve, inflation is 8 or 9%, right? But wage inflation is only 5%. And they worry that the Federal Reserve will look at the 5% and soften because of that instead of tackling the much higher 8%. And that's why Chairman Powell on Friday is going to have to be very direct and very clear. And I think he will be. It's a historic moment. We're living through historic economic times, and his speech is going to go down in history on Friday.
John, so that's what the Fed and Wall Street is looking at. What are economists looking at?
Well, you see, this is where the fun starts, isn't it? Because the JP Morgan Chase is the biggest bank here and pretty much the only bank anybody really cares about. Chase is saying that it thinks the distortions and the supply chain issues will sort themselves out automatically and that inflation will ease off and go away. Morgan Stanley across the street says, no, 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 no. I'm afraid this is not a normal economy. And let me just give you very quickly some examples of the things that we're dealing with here. Rent in New York City now, the 5 boroughs, an average apartment costs you $5,000 a month. That's extraordinary. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has just said, however, that chicken prices are down by 23%, and so too steak and egg prices, although people in this building say, what? We haven't noticed that in our stores. Gas or petrol is down today for the 70th day in a row, but it's still 23% higher than it was a year ago. Now the Saudis are threatening to turn off the spigots again, which really angers people here. here, because people here, whether you agree with this or not, people here can't understand why the Biden administration won't allow drill, baby, drill, more drilling, because there's plenty of oil in America, and these guys can't really understand why Biden will not allow that to happen. And there's a sense here that inflation is going to be with us much longer than we were ever told last year. Do you remember transitional and all that? Well, it's a year now, and the sense is that inflation, certainly core inflation, or at least what you might call structural inflation, which is really wage inflation of 5% and higher, is going to be with us for much, much longer than anybody anticipated. And that is why the Dow is now down 162 points after being in the green when it started a few hours ago today, after yesterday's huge sell-off.
John, good to see you. Thanks very much for that. Our correspondent John Terrace in New York.
Thank you.
The UK's Gatwick Airport has cancelled 26 EasyJet flights because of what it called late notice staff absence from the airport's control tower, where staff were employed by a separate company. Despite today's problems, Gatwick says existing capacity reductions will be lifted at the end of the month, what it called a return to business as usual.
The champion sprinter Usain Bolt is trying to trademark his signature victory pose. He's applied to the US Patent and Trademark Office to try to register his lightning bolt move. Bolt, an 8-time Olympic champion, is now retired from athletics.
Scotland's largest offshore wind farm has been switched on. The Sea Green project has taken 10 years to build and will eventually supply enough electricity to power 1 million homes. Its location is the world's deepest water for a wind farm to be fixed to the seabed, and it's managed jointly by Total Energies and SSE Renewables.
Strikes at the UK's busiest container port have continued into a third day of a planned 8-day walkout. Workers are calling for higher wages to match rising inflation. Our correspondent Andrew Wilson reports.
The Felixstowe workers are into their third day of industrial action. A 7% offer plus cash bonus backdated to January that others might have welcomed remains discarded. In troubled times, they want at least 10.
I have sympathy for nurses, people in the public sector who are not getting the pay rises, but you know it's time that inflation is running away. We deserve, we work hard, we work through the pandemic, we deserve a real terms pay rise.
Felixstowe lies idle. Normally it handles 4 million containers a year, clears 2,000 ships taking goods from 700 ports worldwide. Already containers are diverting to European ports or smaller docks in the UK to be dumped for later. Felixstowe is if not the major artery in and out of the UK. Furniture, fridges, clothes, food, car parts all make their way to British stores and British homes across these docks. The three main inflationary pressures on the international economy are the war in Ukraine, energy prices and the supply chain. Well, this is the UK supply chain, and it's just been switched off. The port authorities say they'll manage. The offer is a good one and the disruption won't be as bad as claimed.
Global supply chains have got much more used to disruption since the onset of COVID. The last 2.5 years we've had COVID, there have been lockdowns, there's been congestion in ports in both Asia and in Europe. Supply chains and supply chain managers have got much better at managing that disruption.
You will stand behind them in their struggle.
Nevertheless, the union organising the strikes, Unite, has been accused of using this dispute as a wedge to coordinate further strike action elsewhere, which it denies.
People all over the country, I think, are feeling the same way. That's why it appears to be, perhaps it appears to be coordinated, because people everywhere are feeling the same way and coming to the same conclusion. Enough is enough. We are not going to take this anymore.
Adam Searle reckons his trucking company will lose $100,000 this week in delayed contracts.
I won't get it back. I'll never get it back. I mean, that's just me. Just in the local community of haulage and warehousing companies, it runs into the millions just for this week alone. And for the rest of the country, I don't know what the figure is, but far greater.
It's possible this becomes a test case for Unite members and unions across the country, which other ports and industries will be watching. A union victory here could motivate other sectors to negotiate harder with reluctant employers. Andrew Wilson, CGTN, Felixstowe.
Well, a summer of strikes and surging prices has pushed the British pound to its lowest rate against the dollar since July.
A cost of living crisis is raising fears of a looming recession, and the recent prediction by US bank Citi has inflation in the UK passing 18% early next year. That's 9 times the target set by the Bank of England. Jasmine Birtles is a financial journalist and personal finance expert and joins us now. Jasmine, with the cost of living crisis getting worse, as we've been hearing, short-term debt might seem pretty attractive for those struggling at the moment.
Yes, it's an understandable thing, and people are looking to borrow. It's interesting, actually, that Iceland, the supermarket chain, has now just brought out some interest-free loans that people can use, very small loans that they can use to buy food in the shop. The government is also trialling interest-free loans in different parts of the country. It may become a nationwide thing later in the year or next year. But yes, those are things that are coming up at the moment. But people are borrowing in all sorts of ways.
And there are plenty of options which aren't necessarily interest-free. What sort of pitfalls do you think consumers should be looking out for when looking to borrow money?
Well, absolutely. You know, number one, it's the interest rate, of course. Now, for example, credit cards seem a nice, easy way to borrow, but the average interest rate there is about 19%, which is fine if you don't get to pay it, if you pay the whole lot off before the interest kicks in. But as soon as that starts to kick in, that very quickly can mushroom into a very difficult debt. Another form of borrowing is buy now, pay later, which is very, very popular, has been for the last 2 or 3 years. It's a particularly popular way for Gen Zers, I would say, to borrow, also sort of young millennials. And the advertising is absolutely thrown at them, particularly with fashion companies, tech companies. You almost have to try to find the way to actually pay rather than do it on buy now, pay later. And again, buy now, pay later does say that it's essentially interest-free. You have your payments spread over 3 payments. If you do that, then, hey, you know, it's not a bad way to do it. But the problem is that because it's so easy to do and it seems so cheap, people find themselves just taking out all of these buy now, pay later loans all over the place, and they forget what they've got. And again, you find that these borrowings can mushroom into something that people can't cope with.
And you mentioned millennials being perhaps susceptible to some of these schemes. Are there other parts of society, perhaps older people and others?
Oh, yes. I mean, this covers all age groups. All age groups are borrowing. Although, to be fair, I think the over 60s, the retired group, tend not to be borrowing quite so much. Quite often, they've got savings that they can dip into. And this is a worry, of course, for people who are of the older generation, because they are dipping into the savings that really they need for later on. So this is a problem there. The borrowing primarily, I would say the greatest bulk is in the younger generations, but it does cover all generations and all types, all levels of earners. People, you know, even though they're on a very, very good income, if their spending, particularly their mortgages, is high, then they're finding themselves having to borrow.
Yeah, it certainly feels like something that's impacting people all across the country. Thanks for your time, Jasmine. That's Jasmine Birtles, financial journalist and personal finance expert.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the crisis facing British farming, rising fuel and fertiliser costs, as well as a drought, deliver a rather bitter harvest.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore, We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Louise Jabarkle. Our top stories: heightened tension across Ukraine as it gets set to mark Independence Day amid warnings of fresh Russian missile strikes.
And fears of a Eurozone recession increase after business growth in France and Germany shrink. Europe's biggest economies are experiencing record inflation. Italy's worst drought in decades has reduced Lake Garda, the largest in the country, to its lowest level in 15 years. Water temperatures at the popular tourist spots have approached the average for the Caribbean Sea, and large areas of previously underwater rock have now been exposed. Our correspondent Alex Fraser is at the lake. Alex, I'm guessing it's a familiar story, but why are water levels there so low?
So you can see where I am here in Sirmione, which is one of the more popular tourist towns along Lake Garda. And the lake level has been dropping across the summer. That's because the lake is usually filled by snow coming down from the mountains, running into rivers, which then run into this lake. And that's one of the contributing factors, because we had a very dry winter in Italy and quite a dry spring as well. And now, of course, with record temperatures in the summer, all three together have caused the level to drop. But also the drought this year on the River Po, which is Italy's largest river and runs through its most fertile agricultural regions. So some of the water from this lake, from Lake Maggiore and from Lake Como, has been diverted into various parts of agriculture. And that's also contributed to this drop in level of the lake. Now, as you can see, I'm standing on the rocks around Sirmione here. Just 2 to 3 months ago, this would actually be where the lake was. Now there's almost an extra 40 meters out of a kind of rocky beach here until you get to the lake. So you can already see the sort of issues that will cause for the ecological stuff in the area and for the environment in general.
40 metres, that's quite a difference, but it's not just northern Italy that's suffering, Alex. Drought is being felt all across Europe.
It absolutely is, and what we've been seeing this week is various things starting to emerge from the rivers across Europe. In the Rhine, it's been very difficult for some ships to get through and to deliver products all across Germany, and that's a major shipping route. Well, we're seeing that ships have been going with reduced cargo to get through there. We've seen in the Elbe River between Germany and the Czech Republic, we've seen that famine stones have been coming up. They're stones that were inscribed in the 1700s to warn of famine if you saw these stones. And we're even seeing World War II era ships. There's a Nazi boat has come up in Serbia, in the Danube, and also here in northern Italy, close to where I am now, in the River Po. We've seen unexploded bombs and other World War II ships coming up from the water. Now, all these things together contribute to a really poor outlook for the environment, clear evidence that the global warming is having an effect in Europe, and stuff that could be really bad for agriculture and the economy. And of course, the cost of living crisis can be further exacerbated when agriculture and farming, when there's droughts, when there's problems with produce. And as such, that creates even more inflation, even more problems across the continent.
Thanks for that, Alex. That's our correspondent, Alex Fraser, at Lake Garda in Italy.
Well, the drought affecting many parts of England has left farmers struggling. Wheat harvests were healthy, but spring crops like maize, linseed and beans are expected to be disappointing.
Land usually used for grazing is too dry at the moment for the grass to grow. Our correspondent, Kitty Logan, reports.
Rural England, the earth scorched by a summer of soaring temperatures. Farmers still reeling and counting their losses.
During which time...
Mike Gibbons runs a 700-acre farm in Surrey. The area had less than half the usual rainfall in recent months.
The crop should be up here somewhere, with pods coming all the way up to the top of the plant. But you can see that it's shortened, and if you look down here, these pods should have another 2 or 3 beans within that pod.
That could amount to up to 50% less yield.
The crops were planted in the spring where they've seen very, very little rainfall. And then, obviously, the impact of that is poor yields.
Wheat planted in winter has fared better. Farmers harvested early in the dry conditions, but this barn should be full of straw.
The straw yield, which the farm does rely on as an added income, has been very low. Normally we would expect 1.5 tonnes an acre, and we're struggling to get half a tonne an acre.
And with grazing land parched, straw is much needed. Grass dried up in the searing heat has left livestock desperately hungry. Farmers forced to use winter feed this summer amid concerns supplies could run out. And the arid land has sparked another problem. This barley field caught fire during the recent harvest. Fire crews couldn't stop the blaze spreading across the tinder-dry land, and half the crop was destroyed. The charred remains, a reminder of what should have been.
There have been hundreds of field fires like this one throughout the heatwave. It's devastating for farmers, and the true total impact of all this isn't yet clear. But what is evident is that farmers will need to adapt to this changing climate.
Farmers are still waiting for rain now. The ground is hard, cracked and dry, making the coming planting season impossible. And without more water, the seeds couldn't even thrive.
These seeds will just not grow at the moment in the current conditions. So time is running out for those crops in terms of establishment, especially oilseed rape.
The urgent question now is how to work around increasingly extreme weather to keep food production stable.
Obviously, we've got to revise our focus, look at our budgets, look at our resource use efficiency, and try and conserve as much moisture as well by the techniques that we grow our crops with, and have a better understanding of what these drought conditions will do year on year to our yield expectations.
For now, farmers can only hope the worst of the heat is over and pray for rain. Kitty Logan, CGTN in southeast England.
And China is struggling with a heatwave, drought and an energy squeeze. Local authorities have been told to conserve energy.
In Shanghai, they're turning off the lights on the city's famous skyline. Our correspondent Wang Se-wen is there.
Behind me is the Bound, Shanghai's most famous landmark, which is also considered the symbol of Shanghai. And usually thousands of people gather here to appreciate the night view, especially on holidays. Well, you can see behind me today is quite a little bit different. Well, the city officials has decided to help conserve energy, so the landscape lightings on the Bound, the northbound and Little Lujiazui areas will be switched off on Monday and Tuesday. Well, the street lights stay on during the night, so people can still take a night stroll near the Bound. Well, the outdoor lightings near the Bound will be switched off as well. And the city also noticed when the power supply gap is about to hit 6 million kilowatt hour, the other landscape lights and other advertising lights in the city, in other parts of the city, will be switched off. And the business will stagger when they use power, and some outdoor construction projects will be suspended. Well, it's estimated that a maximum of 800,000 kilowatt hour of electricity can be saved during the heat wave. Well, China is in the midst of the most intense heat wave since 1961, and Shanghai has been hit really hard by this round of heat wave. And not only Shanghai, multiple cities around China have broken the record for the power consumption usage. And for example, Sichuan and other parts of the city in southern parts of China have imposed restrictions on power supply to ensure the stable power supply for local residents.
Protests are taking place in Bangkok, calling for the resignation of Thailand's Prime Minister. One group performed a ritual to curse Prayut Chan-o-cha, who they say has reached the end of his maximum 8-year term in office. The court's considering whether the 5 years between 2014 and 2019, when he was the head of the military junta, counts towards the constitutional limit.
Schools and government buildings in Manila have been closed as a tropical storm sweeps into the Philippines. Wind speeds of up to 150 kilometers an hour brought down trees, injuring at least 2 people. Villages around the capital have been evacuated over fears of flash flooding and landslides.
Well, the storm hit the Philippines just as millions of pupils across the country were returning to classrooms after a 2-year shutdown because of the pandemic.
There's been growing concern over the impact of the lack of in-person teaching. Our correspondent Gretchen Malalad reports.
After one of the longest school closures in the world, Filipino students are back in class for in-person learning. 28 million have enrolled for the 2022 to 2023 school year, according to the Education Ministry. There was excitement in the air, but there were also first-day jitters. Schools were packed and social distancing was hard to implement. Shortage in classrooms, lack of teachers, and insufficient chairs and textbooks were among the challenges faced by several schools. But despite the difficulties, students are happy to be back.
I'm happy to be here in school. I have nothing to do at home. It was so boring.
To prevent the spread of the COVID virus, students are required to wear a face mask the whole day. Schools have been equipped with thermal scanners and classrooms are disinfected regularly.
There's excitement among students who haven't seen their classmates for over 2 years, but parents are a bit anxious about their children attending face-to-face classes, especially now that the country is dealing with a fresh surge of COVID-19 infections and some recorded cases of monkeypox.
2 students in this school were put in the isolation clinic due to high fever. Their parents and guardians were called immediately to take them home and get tested.
I still worry because I think the virus, which we can't see, is still there, and that makes me worry for my son. What I do is just pray.
Aside from the threat from the virus, educators fear that literacy rates have worsened after more than 2 years of online classes and self-learning modules. A World Bank study showed that about 9 out of 10 children in the Philippines are suffering from learning poverty. The inability of children by age 10 to read and understand a simple story. To address the learning gap, this school in Makati City is focusing on basics for the next few weeks.
There's a gap that we need to address, that we need to give some intervention. That's why we have this 8-week intervention, the 8-week curriculum. We will only focus on the reading and numeracy.
The Education Ministry mandates students learn in person for at least 3 days a week. But starting November 2, all schools should have transitioned to 5 days of in-person classes. Vice President and Education Secretary Sara Duterte says the opening of classes, despite the challenges, is a big victory for Philippine education. Gretchen Malala, CGTN, Manila.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Smaller planes, few passengers, big carbon footprints. The French government under pressure to limit private jets.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The clean-up operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. France's transport minister says he'll push for a clampdown on private jets when European transport ministers meet in October.
Small aircraft leave a higher carbon footprint per passenger, and Clement Bonnet says action is needed urgently to curb emissions. Our correspondent Ross Cullen reports from Paris.
We're here at Le Bourget Airport, which is the third biggest in Paris, but it's the main hub here for business aviation. This is where people come who are able to afford the exclusive use of a personal plane. It's also where the president comes when he flies into and out of the French capital. You might be able to see some of those private jets behind me, perhaps even hear them as they are waiting there on the runway here at Le Bourget. Business aviation has come under the spotlight this week after the French Transport Secretary said that he favoured greater regulation of the industry. The government doesn't have a majority in the French Parliament at the moment, but the idea has already got support from the opposition, with the Green Party leader saying that he favours a complete ban on private jet flights, saying that the emissions from those flights are literally poisoning us. Now, the French Transport Secretary has conceded that business aviation is an important economic activity in France, but he also says that everyone in every sector has its part to play, particularly after the president has called for everyone to reduce their emissions and get used to using less energy. Now, the government says that this autumn it will be bringing a bill focused on the environment, but the French Transport Secretary thinks that discussing private jet flights is too important an issue to be discussed only by national governments and should be debated at EU level as well. There has been a public backlash recently to the use by celebrities of personal planes and also by campaign groups. We know that airline emissions are responsible for about 2 to 3% of global CO2 emissions, but of that, private jet flights contribute a carbon footprint 5 to 14 times greater than commercial flights and 50 times greater than rail travel. Ross Cullen, CGTN at Le Bourget Airport in Paris.
A sweltering heat wave on the US West Coast has brought drought and a strain on resources. Temperatures have dipped slightly in California, but the reprieve is expected to be short-lived. Our correspondent Mark New reports.
A summer of sunshine is wearing down even those typically used to the California sun.
Hotter than normal. Yeah, too hot outside. I work inside. Air conditioning helps.
Yeah, it's getting hot. Year by year, it's getting hot, yeah.
It's been really relentlessly hot across many locations. In most states across the western U.S., it's been about a top 10% summer. So for our period of record, which usually spans over 100 years, this has been in the top 10% of hottest summers.
On Monday, temperatures cooled down throughout many parts of California, giving residents a reprieve. But in some cities, like the capital Sacramento, cooler weather still meant highs of around 99 Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. Other parts of the West Coast are going to be feeling the heat again soon.
But we will see a warming trend throughout this week and more heat waves on the way as soon as mid to late this current week. It's really going to focus on the Pacific Northwest, but there will be some additional hot temperatures across especially the Central Valley of California.
The heat waves have added to drought conditions in California, forcing counties across the state to put restrictions on water usage.
The heat waves have also put a strain on the power grids here. Where I live in Silicon Valley, the neighborhood has temporarily lost power at least 5 times in the past 2 months. A new report from the climate-focused research group First Street Foundation suggests people may need to get used to extreme heat. The report identifies the 7 hottest days expected this year in any U.S. location and calculates how many of those days will likely occur 30 years from now. The average was 18 days.
Oh, God, don't tell me that. No. But yes, I am concerned, of course. I don't want to be in that heat wave.
There's been a lot of research that shows that climate change has made many extreme events more likely, more intense, longer lasting, or larger in scale than they would have been without it. And that definitely includes heat waves.
While many residents say the best strategy is to stay inside, others are intent on finding more creative ways to beat the heat. Mark New, CGTN, San Jose, California.
Now, many people dream of a job in the motor racing industry, but how do you get there?
Tom McCullough's job involves making sure Aston Martin's Formula One cars go faster every single week. And his career has also advanced at some speed since his first job driving on a test track.
My first job in motorsport was working on the IndyCar program for a British company called Reynard Motorsport, and we were racing around the ovals. What I learned there is that motor racing is great fun and that you have to be a real team player to get the most out of a team. I grew up in a motorsport family just from an amateur level, and when I first got out to the racetrack, I remember I was at Homestead Oval in Florida, and I just had to pinch myself. I thought I was the luckiest person in the world to now be getting paid to be playing with racing cars, and to be honest, I didn't know what I was doing at all at that point, but I've learned a lot in the last 25 years, and it's been thoroughly enjoyable.
And to find out more about this series, check out CGTN's social media accounts and search for My First Job.
A look at our headlines once again. Heightened tensions across Ukraine as it gets set to mark Independence Day amid warnings of fresh Russian missile strikes.
Our other headlines: fears of a Eurozone recession increase after business growth in France and Germany shrank. Europe's biggest economies are experiencing record inflation.
And lights out in Shanghai, one of the world's most famous skylines, goes dark in order to save energy.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. See you again, same time, same place tomorrow. From all of the team here in London, goodbye. Bye.